Okay, welcome. Just the two of us today. Shelly Ann is touring the U.S. She was in New York last week. Buffalo, I think she went to early this week. And was it Tennessee she's off to today? Um, Gallivanting around the great USA. Actually, she's not too far from where I am here in Kansas. Um, I would have enjoyed getting together with her, but her schedule's pretty busy, and here we are. Cass, uh, you're up in Canada, enjoying the. How is it? Is it cold there this week?
I think it's about 8 degrees Celsius. So what is that?
Uh,
48, I
yeah, in the
think.
40s. Yeah, so it's
Something like that.
actually a little colder here. Right at that's it's 48. It's the same. It's yeah,
There we
we're
go.
about the same. It was 41 yesterday, so I hadn't even looked. It's right in front of me, but I hadn't even looked. So let's get started on this with just the two of us, and we'll do the introductions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think you said welcome to Open Conversations with International Coaches. Today is Thursday, the 28th of 2024. We're almost at the end of the month. And our topic today is healthy boundaries. So I'm Cass J. Henry. I'm an abundance coach, and I work out of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I see my clients both in person as well as virtually. And if you're looking to get a hold of me, you can find me on cassjhenry.com. What is an abundance coach? I work with people, bringing them from a place of lack to a place of abundance. And one of the major parts of my work is mindset. People who are living in a place where they feel stagnant, they feel stuck, things aren't happening for them. This is what we call lack. And what I like to show people is that in their life right now, something that they're not even noticing is that they are full of abundance, and that it's just a mindset change to figure that out. And I say just, mindset change is a pretty big deal. So if you want to talk to me about how we accomplish that, set up a free 30-minute discovery call, and I'd love to talk to you about what abundance coaching looks like.
Awesome. And I've been a student of the law of attraction since my mid-teens. Before I even knew it was called the law of attraction, I just noticed things that happened and made the connections and got interested in it and started digging into it. And the idea of a sense of lack and a sense of abundance and making that switch is really one of the major pillars of the law of attraction. And people might say, well, what is it like the mental switch? I'm more interested in the abundance of real stuff. But, it happens that the abundance of real stuff is significantly controlled by that mindset. And so what you're doing there is powerful and amazing stuff that will affect people's stuff, to put it in generic terms. So that's great.
Absolutely.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Stephen B. Henry. My friends call me Steve. Um, I'm a multi-niched coaching practitioner, and that includes being a published author, a digital content creator, an online presence consultant, a business success guide, and a personal development mentor. So I deal with the holistic perspective of people's lives, businesses, family perspective, and so on. I've been a student of law of attraction since my teen years, as I mentioned, and I know the power of visualization and manifestation and of affirmations, and especially the subconscious mind. And typically a person who says, that doesn't work, they're simply doing it wrong. I work with men and women who are wanting to start or expand their online presence, as I usually call it. I help them get unstuck in their personal and business lives so they can move forward with their online journey of success. I'm a Canadian, currently living here in the US. I earn my entire living online, helping others do the same. And I'm available, I'm approachable, and I'm affordable. And you can find me at stephenbhenry.com. So our topic, as you said, Cass, today, and I'm going to lean in so I can read the fine print, is healthy boundaries. And, that came out of our conversation last week. For the last many weeks, Cass, you've been the one who's suggested the topics at the end of our presentations, and they're just amazing natural flows from one to the other. And I was, I don't know, I guess a little unsure about this topic as to, where I would take it and what I could, kind of see with it. And I reached out to a friend of mine. I consider them a friend, and I use the pronoun them because it's neither he nor she, and that is ChatGPT. And I have discovered, I use ChatGPT a lot as a researcher, as a study buddy, as an assistant. And I'm very impressed by what it finds for me. The key is in the prompting, and it isn't rocket science. The coding that underlies AI, large language models like ChatGPT, may itself be rocket science or even greater than rocket science, but the interaction with it really works best when it's conversational. This idea that you have to become a prompt engineer and there's all these tricky dicky things you can do that it'll make it better, just talk to it like you would, like Cass, like you and I are talking here, like we were talking before we came live on here. And when you talk in real terms, as you would to an assistant or a researcher or a fellow coach or professional, it will respond beautifully and give you what you're looking for. It's much, much easier to work through the layers to get exactly what you need. So it shared with me today 10 areas of the this whole area of boundaries and what are the actual benefits of setting proper boundaries, behavioral boundaries, and different types of boundaries. And so I'm going to open this with the first one, the first benefit, and that is the idea that it gives you self-respect. When you set healthy boundaries, it reflects the sense of self-respect and self-worth. It reflects what's in you. You set and enforce those boundaries so you're able to demonstrate both to yourself and to others, and I think the yourself part is maybe the most important, that you value the needs and feelings and limitations that affect you, that govern you. And then you can equally respect those in others, and at least give deference to them and listen to them where you might not otherwise do so. And so that struck me out of the 10 examples that I got as the opener, the key, the foundation for what's there.
I'm going to jump in and maybe pull us back a little bit and just give a general idea of what a boundary is.
Yeah, good idea.
So boundaries are the limits that we establish in various areas of our life, and they're there to protect our well-being. That's why they're there. You might have boundaries in relationships, and they are the guidelines and expectations that we set to maintain that healthy level of mutual respect and emotional safety. So they define what's acceptable to us and what's unacceptable behavior, and they help establish a sense of autonomy, fairness, and trust between individuals. So understanding how to set these personal limits is essential for building those relationships and maintaining them healthily. I definitely think that that sense of well-being, emotional safety, self-respect is very important, as you stated. There are different types of boundaries in different avenues of our life. And so I'm going to go through a couple of those. I think there's 6 of them that I have here. So I'm just going to go through them. I'll touch on each one, but it starts with physical, intellectual, sexual, emotional, financial, time, and social media is one that came up as well. So that's 7. So physical boundaries are the limits around physical touch, personal space, and proximity. So it might be, no, I don't want to hug right now, or yes, I'll shake your hand, or maybe you need a certain distance. And that's something that we all are very familiar with after the past few years, that 6 feet of distance and, not shaking hands and maybe wearing a mask, that would be part of a physical boundary. Intellectual boundaries are about beliefs, values, and morals. So you might choose not to discuss a certain topic with people or about your own beliefs because you worry that maybe they're not shared. And so that's a boundary that you decide you're going to keep to yourself, or you do know that they're not shared, you're not just worried, and you choose not to connect on that level. Sexual would be about setting limits around sexual activities and preferences. Consensual, respectful communication regarding desires, needs, and limitations is important in establishing sexual healthy relationships. So in this instance, you're going to look for enthusiastic consent when you're establishing boundaries. If the person's not on the same page as you, you're not going to want to proceed. And I want to just put in a little note here, especially with if either party is on any sort of recreational substance, then you can't actually give enthusiastic consent in that scenario. So probably not a good place to engage in, and you don't want to break boundaries there. Mm-hmm. The next one is emotional. So emotional boundaries involve setting limits that promote your well-being. You may ask for personal space when you're feeling overwhelmed, or you may not allow other people to criticize your feelings, that sort of idea. Financial boundaries are about shared finances and lending money. You can also have personal boundaries in any of these, especially with financial boundaries. You may limit yourself on how you spend things. And especially when it comes to shared environments. So if you have roommates or partners, then you're going to want to set those boundaries and limits ahead of time. And time boundaries. So this is about allocating your time. So like if you have a regular 9-to-5 job, you may say that that's when I'm at work, plus my travel time maybe, but that's when I focus on work, and when I'm at home, I'm not going to take calls about work. That sort of idea. Or if you work from home, again, setting those boundaries is really important. This is family time. I am not going to do work, right? So those ideas. And the last one was social media. And I really liked coming across that because, again, that can be a personal boundary that you set. I'm going to spend 15 minutes scrolling, and then I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to, put in a load of laundry or go for a walk or call a friend. But it's also around the one that I've heard many times is around what gets put on social media. So children who cannot give consent to being on social media. A lot of people I know won't put their kids online in that way. They don't want photographs of them. They don't want videos of them. They don't want a future employer to be able to look back at all this history of them online, their digital footprint, right? So I think that that's a really neat boundary that some parents put in place. Sorry, that was a big mouthful, but those are the different types of boundaries that are there. I'm really interested in what else is on your list, Steve.
Well, I really liked that list and the way you talked about it, and what it brought to mind is this, we were talking about boundaries, and we sort of look at them as our boundaries, setting our boundaries. And in reality, we have to be sensitive to other people's boundaries. So not only do we have to have, introspection, self-awareness, and take those 7 areas and see how they fit in what we do, what we choose to do, what we choose not to do. I think the positive and the negative both come into that. We've got to also be willing to be aware of where other people's boundaries are. Sometimes we're sort of afraid to do things, to open topics, because we think we know where somebody's boundaries are, but we're afraid we might get their nose out of joint. We don't want to do that. That's respectful. But if we simply asked, when we're interacting either, one-on-one or in a group, if we have something we want to share, we can always say, oh, excuse me, I was thinking of this. Is it okay if I bring it up? And we can get affirmation that it's okay or not. And that's fine. We just need to be aware of that. So I think that increased self-awareness is it goes beyond the self, because we interact with, our circle becomes a Venn diagram with other people's circles, and we have to look at where they overlap. I think that's important. Setting boundaries can actually, where we think of them as kind of, pushing away, they can actually bring relationships closer and certainly produce better relationships, because we know where these things lie, and we know where the edges are, and then we can begin exploring those edges and getting to know somebody better. So again, your list of 7 is so important, because it is in the doing that we look at each of those 7 items. And I think that's really, really good. And I've got more to share, but pick up on that and see where you go with it.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was just thinking about the idea of boundaries like a fence, and it could be a wooden fence that you can't see through. It can be, so it's rigid boundaries. It can be a chain link fence that you can see through. It's just a boundary that's there to delineate one side and the other, and that's the idea, is that one side is yours and the other is just as important. Yeah. You're just coming to a place of where that boundary is. Mm-hmm. And it got me thinking about the 2 most commonly used and also the 2 most overlooked boundaries that we use, and they are yes and no. Those are both full, complete sentences, yes period or no period, and those can be setting boundaries. When somebody comes at you with a question or wanting your time or needing a favor, whatever it is, you have the opportunity to look inside at your own introspection that you've done. Do you want to or do you not want to? And saying one of those is setting a boundary. And the one that I think most people struggle with the most is no. Saying no is okay. In fact, saying no is always okay. Even if you think you might have wanted to say a yes, you can say, you know what? I need time to think about that. That's a temporary no. Mm-hmm. You may come back and decide to be a yes, but saying, I need time to think about that, that is a boundary that you're setting, and you can go away and contemplate what you've been asked. You can discuss with maybe your partner or anybody else that might be involved. You can check your calendar and see about your time. Have you scheduled, a place where this could fit in? And then you can come back with that information and give them a proper answer. So setting boundaries is not just about what you don't want to see or don't want to do. It can be about how you show up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's so important that we understand that boundaries include what we allow. not just what we disallow. We think of them as fences, but they might actually be gates or doors. And
Absolutely, yes.
we understand that. And I liked what you said about no, and then being a temporary no in many circumstances. I had a friend that always used to say, when they were a little uncomfortable with something and they weren't confident in saying no, or they didn't even know if they meant no, they hadn't made up their mind or thought about it. It was something new. They would say, that's a definite maybe. And it was a play on words a little bit, and they made fun of it themselves, but because they would say it with a wide smile, but it was in fact saying maybe, temporary no, maybe, but don't beat me up on it right now. It's a definite maybe. So as you said, let me go and think about it and so on. And it was an interesting approach on things that people who knew this person really appreciated. And many people kind of factored that into their own approach on things. So it was a breath of fresh air. And I really feel that boundaries, and the healthy boundaries, we can throw up walls sometimes as a defense that may not be healthy, because sometimes we have to grapple with things. We have to put ourselves out there and understand things, and we can hide away and suffer on our own and do harm to ourselves. That's not a healthy boundary. Sometimes that's necessary, and we do it for a while, but we should be understanding that that's closing ourselves into a cocoon too tightly, and that we need to reach out, and that might mean seeking help. So we can't just use boundaries as excuses for not doing or not facing or not standing up. And that's hard. That's hard, isn't it? It can be very difficult. People that suffer trauma, and especially those who suffer from PTSD, the triggers that are there that they have to set boundaries for, and in many cases, the people around them don't even know that they're producing triggers. The person has simply closed themselves off with the boundaries instead of discussing and reaching out to their friends and saying, hey, give me a moment, listen to me while I share this with you. It's important.
I think something that you just brought up for me is about remembering that these are your boundaries and you are deserving of having people respect them. An example that comes to mind from my own life. I'm going to do this because Shelly Ann is usually the one who does this. I was going to a friend's memorial service this past summer, and it was somebody who was very close to me, and going to this event was very important to me. And somebody else who was going to the event had said, this was sort of a social, like, let's celebrate this person. And a lot of people who would be there wanted to engage in drinking alcohol. And this other person said, you know what, like, I'm only going to come for the first 2 hours. Is it all right if we make the first 2 hours alcohol free? And then after that point, you can do whatever you guys are going to do after I leave. And nobody had a problem with that. Everybody said, absolutely understandable. That's fine. Well, I have an issue with cannabis. I happen to have an allergy, and there's not much I can do about it. And instead of saying, oh, hey, while those first 2 hours are alcohol free, could they also be cannabis free? I sort of said, well, I have this problem with cannabis, but since we're going to be outside, if you smoke it up, downwind from me, things will be fine. Just please don't do it like right close to me. Because I was thinking about other people's needs more than I was thinking about my own needs and my own emotional needs. And I went to the event, and I was only able to spend about 30 minutes there before people started smoking cannabis, and I had a reaction and I had to leave. Mm-hmm. So I did not set a healthy boundary. I did not ask for what I actually needed. I wobbled and wavered and tried to think of the other person, more than my own needs.
Yeah.
Whereas the other person about the alcohol had set a firm boundary and had said, this is what I need. And people came and rose to the occasion for that person. And I'm sure they would have for me as well.
Yeah, I think that that's so powerful because we do tend to do that. We do tend to think that we need to think of other people first. And, that comes back to the story I've shared at least twice, maybe 3 times in the past about the woman on the airplane with her child. And when an emergency came up and the oxygen mask dropped, she felt that she had to put it on her child first. A mother's need to serve the needs of the child, when what she should have done was put it on herself first, because had she fumbled or taken a little longer in putting it on her child, if the child had been fidgeting or any number of things, she could have reached her place of passing out, and then both of them would have lost. So you've got to think about yourself in many instances first, and that's not a bad thing. Now, you don't do that at the expense of other people. You think of yourself in relation to other people, but putting yourself in the forefront and looking at all of your needs. Most people, especially in a group of friends, will accept that, as they did for the woman with the drinking problem. And that's not a hard ask if you're prepared to do it. And it's because we aren't true to ourselves. It's because we often defer to everybody else that we get in the habit. Shelly Ann again. She's not even here, and she's here. I love it. But you get into the habit of, acting that way, which is to your detriment. But think about it. In a group of friends sharing, and at a wake or anywhere else, just a group of friends sharing, if you're among those friends, do you not bring something of value to that group? And so if you have to leave after 30 minutes, are you not depriving that group of what you bring to it? And so, I'm not trying to, stretch it too far, but it's true. The fact that the group works, the fact that you get invited to something, to a party or whatever, and the fact that, that you all shared, in this particular case, the memory of this person, you're a part of that. You're an integral part of that. And people will realize that there's something missing when your smile isn't there, your silly dad joke isn't there, your whatever it is that makes you an integral part of that party. And if you don't even go at all because of something like that, and you don't bring that platter of hors d'oeuvres that everybody looks forward to, then you're negatively affecting the whole thing because you were uncomfortable, perhaps even afraid, to ask of the others, hey, help me out here. And, again, what we're doing here, we're coaches and guides and mentors, and we're hoping to help people. That's traditionally what we do. And so we can share a lot of these things in these 1-hour live sessions. We share ideas. In the practice of our coaching, we teach concepts, we develop concepts, we give you the support you need while you're learning concepts, and that's a positive thing. That's a wonderful thing. So don't put up barriers, have boundaries, and reach out for help when you need it. I think that's the best thing I can say in that regard.
There's I've just forgotten her name. There's a parenting book, Barb. oh, I cannot remember her name. She talks about different types of parenting and how there is the brick wall and the jellyfish. And the brick wall is firm and does not bend. And this is a barrier. This is what it is. And a jellyfish is sort of sloppy and floppy and goes at the whims of others and the tide, right? And then she talks about a backbone or the spine, and how, you know, it can be solid, but it moves and it flows and it can bend and it can go different ways, and that's what you're aiming for. And I think that's a really good analogy when it comes to a boundary. You're right, you aren't creating barriers or, you know, wishy-washy maybes. You're creating a boundary, which is like having a spine and standing up for what you need, right? I wanted to dive in here to an example of a method that a lot of people use when setting boundaries. This you've probably heard, most people have heard, is the when you, I feel scenario. So you start off with, you state a specific action that you're having trouble with. So that might be when you increase the volume of your speech. And then you share how you feel when the other person does that. So you'd say, I feel intimidated and unsure of what will happen next. Then you do the I imagine. So you're trying to put yourself in the other person's perspective here. You might say, I imagine you are only excited to get your point across. So now you've built up the what happens, how you feel, why you think it happens. Now you say, well, your need, what the frustrated part of you needs in this situation. So you might say, I need to feel safe when I'm communicating, and I want to maintain a calmer interaction. So then you make an ask of the person. Would you be able to keep your voice level? And the last part is the consequence of an unmet ask. If you are unable to keep your voice level, I will ask for a break so we can come back and talk later when things will feel less heated. So I'm going to read the whole sentence would be long, or it might be more than a sentence here, but when you increase the volume of your speech, I feel intimidated and unsure of what will happen next. I imagine you are only excited to get your point across. I need to feel safe when I'm communicating and want to maintain a calmer interaction. Would you be able to keep your voice level? If you are unable to keep your voice level, I will ask for a break so we can come back and talk later when things feel less heated. So that's a complete ask of how you might want to set. That's just one example of how you may want to set a boundary with somebody about how you communicate together.
Those are powerful memes. Can you say the point
when you, I feel, I imagine, I need, would you, and consequence.
Right. Those little vignettes that you can build upon, templates really is what they are. They are so powerful. I know when I first got into sales, and years ago, I had a mentor who shared something with me. There's many different sales techniques that people use. And the one, and in dealing with objections, especially because people will react negatively to many sales approaches. We all know this. It's why coaches often fail in business, because they don't want to sell. They don't like selling. The mental structure, I guess, of a person who's going to be a good coach probably isn't a good salesman. And so, it's not a rule, but it's a likelihood. And so they need to find ways of doing marketing that they're comfortable with, and there are many. And they also need to find ways of dealing with objections so they can actually close the sale, because that's the important thing. And there's many different closes to use. The one that was shared with me at that particular time, which opened my eyes to the idea of these kinds of templates, was one called Feel, Felt, Found. Very simple to memorize, feel, felt, found. And when people had an objection, you thought about how it affected you. And you would say, I feel the same way. What I felt in those circumstances was, and what I found that I could do about it, right? I feel the same way. I felt this, and I found I could do this. Very easy flow to go through. The one you just shared is a little more complex, but the ultimate end of it is very easy flow to go through. And uh, I really highly recommend to anybody struggling with boundaries to take a look at that. Might ask if you would put it in the comments of the various places where this is posting to. Um,
Sure.
it'd be really good, because that's one of the best I've heard. I had not heard that one before. I'm pretty experienced, and I've got a lot of knowledge, and it's wonderful to find something new every day, which I regularly do, sometimes more than once a day, and that's the best one that I've heard in a long, long time. So thank you for sharing that. I just
Yeah, I mean, it is more complex. A boundary generally has three parts: what action you won't tolerate, why not, and what you will do if it happens. I'm not comfortable when people shout at me. If you continue to shout, I'll end the conversation. That's the simple,
yeah,
version of it.
That's feel, felt, found. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the other important thing to know about, when I say why not, I'm not comfortable is enough. You do not owe anybody your backstory, your history, your trauma, your triggers, any of that when you're setting a boundary. You may have the kind of relationship with the person that, they may already know, or you will go into it at another time. But oftentimes, it's okay to set boundaries with your boss. It's okay to set boundaries with your acquaintances. It's okay to set boundaries with your friends, your family, your partners. It boundaries are there to serve you and the other person. It informs them, right? So whoever it is, it may depend on how you word it, how you interact with them, especially if it's something that's in a business realm. You may want to actually do it in writing, so that, if there's ever an issue, that HR knows, hey, here's the paper trail. This is what happened.
Yeah, along with that comes the whole idea of clear and enhanced communication. So you need not only to talk about it, not only to present it, but you need to develop good communication skills, and that simply reflects on everything else you do. So these are not penalties that we're paying in order to set boundaries. They are things that we're learning how to do that influence and speak to the rest of our lives. So it's really win-win, and that's good. And along with that then comes a reduction in stress and anxiety. I know you went through almost a month of stressful occurrences that created anxiety over a circumstance that ended up with being where you are now. You moved. And I know the backstory to it. I know that it came out of just a chance happening. You were thinking about it anyway, but this now motivated you to do it. But then all of the impediments, what I call the stumbling blocks, came one after another, and I could see the anxiety building as we talked privately, as we were here Thursdays. I could see the stress and anxiety. How did it turn out?
It turned out amazing.
Yeah.
I went through all the steps, and it ended up great. But I had to go through all the steps to get here.
Yep, exactly. So when you realize that the steps are inevitable, but that they tend to turn out, there's been actual research on this, and I can't quote it, but something like 94% of all the things that we worry about never happen. And of the 6% that do happen, they mostly, the vast majority, turn out in the end to be okay. Now, it's not to say everything's going to turn out okay, and sometimes it's real disasters that come along, but that's life. But when we set the boundaries that guide our performance, that guide our choices, that guide our actions, and we understand the boundaries of others. I know you had some dealings with a person that were very frustrating. And so you did put something in writing, or you're going to, and you dealt with it. You dealt with it and did what you had to do. You understood where your boundaries came up against theirs and what the options were. I'm not getting into specifics here because it's none of my business to share that, but just generalizing on the ideas, I witnessed a real example of these things transpiring in real time. And it showed me how important they were and how that whole, stress and anxiety thing can be debilitating, and it can be um, a major factor in outcomes. It can destroy the positive outcome if we give into it. And what I truly responded to in it with great feeling was that you were dealing with each one. As tough as some of them were, you dealt with each one in turn. And I already knew before I brought this part of the conversation up that you've ended up in the better place for it. So, and that's an example to other people. Stories of our real lives can be examples that underscore what we're doing. And I think in terms of setting boundaries, I've always seen you to be, a person who does set boundaries, at least later in life. And, it's come from experience and understanding. And I think it's what makes you a great coach in this whole area of abundance, of taking lack or want and moving it to abundance. I'm thoroughly, pleased and impressed to see where that works. And
thank you.
Yeah, what you share with people is what you have proven works in real life. And guys out there in radio land, I really hope that you're taking these things in. I think this is week 29 we're in?
28, yeah.
28. I think that, it's week 28 on the list of ones that have been indexed on YouTube, but I think it's 29.
That's true.
The first one didn't get put on YouTube because we weren't quite ready with YouTube yet. So yeah, there are actually 29. The first one's a little funny. We weren't very skilled at it. I watched it the other day. But of all of these, and if you haven't seen them all, I encourage you to go back and look at them. OCIC, Open Conversations with International Coaches, OCICnetwork.com. We have them all up there now for view. You can also get them on YouTube if you prefer. I'm a little worried about YouTube, and they're doing a lot of crazy things, so I'm a little worried, and I wanted to have a place where they were anyway. Some of those are still linked to YouTube, but we're working on that. It's a time consumer. But I really encourage you to look at each one of these on the various topics that we've covered. And again, you'll see how they tie into each other. And in terms of setting boundaries, why we should set boundaries is covered in a number of them. How we should set boundaries is covered in a number of them. What those boundaries could be is covered in a number of them. We've talked about a lot of foundational material for setting healthy boundaries.
Absolutely. I really picked up on something you said earlier about how you set the boundary, the language you use, and the way you do it. The idea that you can't shout a boundary at somebody, and you also can't expect somebody else to infer a boundary. So you may act in a certain way. You may think, oh well, they must know. But if you haven't told them, you can't know that they know. right?
Yeah.
And it's important also to recognize that boundaries are not about changing the other person's actions. It's about what you will do if the other person does engage in that action. So a boundary is you can make requests on them, but they have to be realistic. Something that I think about often is I not so much these days, but maybe a decade ago or more, I used to be able to get really excited about a topic, and I would get I don't know if heated is the right term, but I would get exuberant. And I would speak fast and I would speak loudly, and it would be a lot. And if somebody at that time had said to me, "Oh, I can't have that. You can't do that, or I have to go away," I'm not sure a decade ago I would have been able to make a change in how I interacted on those particular points. But that's not the boundary. The boundary is when that happens, the other person chooses to step away.
Yeah.
And that's fine, right?
Yeah. And coming to terms with that is fine, actually empowers you to make those changes yourself when necessary. You don't have to stop being exuberant, but when you're discussing something intensely with that particular person, you now know their boundary. You can be more willing and more appreciative of toning it down and slowing it down a little for them. And if you don't set the boundaries, if you don't understand what the boundaries are, and they don't set the boundaries and bring them up in front of you, then that doesn't happen. And it's not because you're a nasty person, it's because you don't really know what that layer is all about. And so we have to do that. One of the notes that I have here is that setting boundaries gives us increased productivity and focus. And I think that's a little bit about what you were getting to there, because when we can interact with other people in a more communicative way, when in communication being two ways, then we can get more done. If it's a collaboration, we can certainly get more done. If it's helping somebody or them helping us, we can get more done. If it's just sharing ideas, we can understand their ideas better and we can apply them and get more done. So that increased productivity and focus doesn't seem to have any aspect with boundaries. In fact, aren't boundaries pushing away the focus and the productivity? No, it's opening the door to greater productivity, greater focus. The boundaries open channels of communication.
I wrote down healthy boundaries are what allow for reciprocity in relationships.
Yeah.
That's the give and the take. That's the two-way communication that's happening. Mm-hmm. That reciprocity of knowing and being aware and present for both what you want and need and what the other party or parties want or need. Yeah, absolutely.
You froze there for me. I don't know if maybe I'm frozen for you or you're back. The reciprocity is an interesting word. I like that word. I love that word. I actually have a website called reciprocity.net. It's a work in progress. It's my own website, and I'm kind of like the shoemaker whose kids have no shoes. This one I'll get around to it, someday. But I've had that name Reciprocity and the domain name reciprocity.net for decades. And I've repurposed it a few times, and the current purpose is not ready for prime time, although it's out there. I build all my websites live. Sometime we've discussed talking about topics that have to do with tech and various other things. And when we talk about websites, I'll explain that because it's very important. But on our current topic, I think that you alluded to some things that involved emotional response, how we feel about things. And I think that by setting boundaries, we increase our emotional resilience. And that's actually a mindset thing. When people do things that hurt us, and we say, oh, woe is me, and I can't deal with this, and oh, it's terrible, I'm sad, I'm going to go cry in a corner. We find out that what they did was in many cases not intentional. They weren't directing it to harm us, and we took exception to it, but we don't need to overreact either. And when we have a greater emotional resilience because of our defining our own boundaries, so we know what we accept and what we don't accept, and it becomes more transactional rather than just an emotional response, we're able to deal with those things better. And I know people that get so caught up in their emotions with every little thing that bothers them, and they stop talking to people, they push friends away, sometimes forever. And it's mind-boggling to me why they suffer so much in their life for things that aren't so important at all. If they just wouldn't let them hit their emotions so hard. And it's because they don't set boundaries. Go ahead.
I want to challenge you that maybe they are setting a boundary. Maybe it is something that is life importance to them. I don't know the specific situations you're talking about, but going no contact with somebody is an option. If somebody's toxic in your life, and you've identified this, and you decide that, you know what, I can't do this anymore, setting that boundary might just be what's happening. I'm not saying it always is. There are people who are extremely emotional, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, I don't disagree with you on that. In the cases that I'm referring to, and I know several people that are like this, the things that they get terribly offended at, that lead to life-altering decisions, they most often realize that they took them out of context or took them wrong, and overreacted to them. But then their pride gets in the way, and they can't go back and say, hey, it's because of not having that open communication. That's really the problem, is they're not comfortable within themselves communicating the other way to it, to say, and when they can say, well, that bothered me, and this is how I feel about it, that's one response, if it really did bother them. But also, if they can say, I was wrong about that, I misunderstood what you said, and I overreacted, and I'd like to pick up where we left off. That, there's different responses there. Now, if it is offensive to them, if it really bothers them emotionally, then that type of response is fine. I'm not saying that response is wrong across the board, but when we don't communicate, that's what it comes back to, is communication. When these individuals cocoon themselves in their hurt and their, self-applied sympathy for the circumstances without looking out beyond at how it goes, that's when the problem occurs. And once again, that's where people need to reach out for help. Speak, if you can't speak to the person who apparently offended you, then speak to a friend of yours that you can communicate with and discuss the matter and see if there isn't a better resolution for it.
Or with a coach or with a therapist.
Or with a coach or a therapist, exactly. To bring it back to who we are, that's true. And, that's what we're trained for. And that's what coaches who learn their craft and do their homework are trained for. And so, and certainly, they can be better. A good coach is almost certainly better than just a good friend. Good friends are great to have. They serve a purpose. They provide strength and encouragement. They're someone you can easily turn to, but a good friend will also tell you, that's a little deep, and you really should speak to a professional about that. And we should be able to accept that without getting our nose out of joint and, brushing off the friend for the rest of our lives when they were simply meaning to help us. So it's a balance, and life gets in the way. But maybe we're sharing a few things today that will help you deal with life.
Yeah, something that we didn't really touch on is examining. I mean, I think you did in the beginning, just that stuff happens and we feel uncomfortable and we're not really sure why. And so you need to examine your boundaries that are already there before you start looking at what other boundaries that you can set. So it's good to have that internal exploration where maybe you do some journaling and you ask yourself questions around the boundaries that you want to set. And then it's really important to be consistent with your boundaries. Your boundaries don't carry very much weight if you don't enforce them. Mm-hmm. So people might ignore you and walk all over you if you don't consistently enforce those boundaries that, maintain, I think is a better word. So even when you're feeling guilty or overwhelmed, you still want to, you don't want to just because it would be easier not to listen to my boundary now, let's do the thing that I don't want to do.
Yeah, right? and that's where communication comes in as well. Again, communication is, and we did a session on communication too, so I commend you to go back and look at that if you haven't. But communication underpins all of these aspects. I think everything we've said today requires reasonable communication to support it and make it happen. I think that's really great. I just noticed that we're coming up to the end of the time, and I wondered when we started today, before we got going, I did say to you, Cass, are the two of us going to be able to keep this going for the hour when there's usually 3 inputs here? And here we are nearly out of the hour, and I don't know where we've gone. I certainly haven't covered my 10 points today, and that leaves us open for another one. But I want to jump right to the end, because I think it will help us sum up what's there, if you don't mind. Respect for others' boundaries, respect for the boundaries of others. We've mentioned that a couple of times as we've gone forward here, but I think that is the critical outcome of setting your own boundaries, is realizing how important boundaries can be, and therefore how important they can be to others. And if people don't have boundaries, and you're going to interact with them, boundaries, you see people that give in to everything. Using your analogy of the brick wall and the starfish, or the
jellyfish,
jellyfish rather, somewhere in there, I would put the grand old willow tree, that stands up and bends whichever way the wind blows. And there are those who just can't stand up, for themselves, and they struggle and they blow with the wind. And when you have boundaries, you can help somebody else understand their boundaries, and you can appreciate their boundaries or lack thereof, and you can have a respect for that. And that actually can build friendships. I think it's a powerful thing that proves that boundaries are not just brick walls. They are fences with gates, and we can allow people inside our boundaries when the time is right. And we can go inside other people's boundaries when the time is right, but it takes communication.
Absolutely. Barbara Coloroso, the name came to me, is the one with those 3 jellyfish, brick wall, and backbone. And I'm going to throw out there, maybe next week we could do something on self-reflection. I don't think we've done stuff on self-care, but introspection, self-reflection, that sort of idea, looking inside.
I really like that.
We talked about that a lot today. Yeah.
I think that is. I'm just making a note of that because I'll forget. But I think that definitely again, as I say, communication is almost universal for any individual. Certainly any client I work with, I can't deliver the answers. I can deliver modalities, I can deliver methods, I can deliver ideas and concepts, and I can show them how to work with them. But they have to look inside and find within themselves how they're going to do that, and bring that part to the party. I think that is a topic that is 100% intrinsic to all the things that we do as coaches and guides and mentors. Our clients' introspective approach, and as coaches, our introspective understanding of our clients. Yeah, there's just two sides to that sword, and it's interesting. So with that, we're at the time. Go ahead and play the music. I love it. Bye-bye.